In 1992, a pinball game for the Commodore Amiga came along and made a huge impact. Pinball Dreams, developed by Digital Illusions CE, later known simply as DICE. Sure, there were plenty of pinball games before this, but Pinball Dreams was a new standard of graphics, sound, and playability. It was also a point of pride for Amiga users once the MS-DOS port arrived the following year and promptly disappointed with its shoddy presentation. However, a game designer named James Schmaltz knew he could do better on the PC and decided to build a game from the ground up in x86 assembly in order to make the best use of the hardware. 10 months later, the result was Epic Pinball, a game that went on to become one of the most popular shareware titles around and proved once and for all that MS-DOS machines were capable of excellent pinball. A simple enough story. However, things get a little more intriguing when you look deeper, and something called Silverball makes an appearance. This was a game that was developed by Schmaltz during the same period, although instead of being published by Epic Mega Games, it was published by Microleague Multimedia. Records show that this was released several months after Epic Pinball, but this was not a sequel. Rather, it was a technical precursor using an earlier version of the same engine. From what I can put together, Epic got first dibs to publish what would become Epic Pinball, seeing as Schmaltz had an existing relationship with them from when they published another game of his, Solar Winds. But there were still several tables and other playable assets that didn't make the cut, and this is where publishers like Microleague came in. Since Epic Pinball was only sold by phone or mail order, and Microleague had a retail presence, a totally separate deal was made to sell these older game assets on store shelves. This would become Silverball and Silverball Plus 2, the latter of which I own here. The original game came in a box, but this Plus 2 version added some stuff and was available by contacting Microleague. It also came with a quick start guide, a Microleague order form, and a sweet manual containing rules and tips on how to get the most out of each table. It's not quite as slick as manuals from Epic, but hey, I guess that's why they were called Microleague, not Macroleague. Okay, so that doesn't make any sense. If you are familiar with Epic Pinball, then Silverball begins with a very familiar intro, followed by a very familiar menu. Right down to the hot seat multiplayer and other options available here, you get familiarity. Familiarity, but not duplication, because things start to change once you dive into the tables themselves. There were 4 tables to choose from in the original release, but as the title suggests, this Plus 2 version contains 2 more that were yanked from the bowels of Epic Pinball, as well as a 7th one if you ordered an add-on disc from the publisher. Before playing a table, you can choose from traditional 3-ball play or add 2 more, and select 3 angles of the cabinet to adjust the gravity of the simulation. Then it's on to some proper pinball playing perfection. Wait, no it's not, because Silverball is a notable step backwards from its more well-known sibling. And that only makes sense knowing that it technically came before, but man, I can imagine if you didn't know that, you'd be thinking, wow, what happened? First of all, the good, and that is that the graphics and sound are all fine. Its crispy VGA graphics run at a smooth 60 frames per second, and the music is all composed by Robert Allen in S3M tracker goodness. It also controls using the 2 shift keys for flippers, just like I prefer, and you have keys for nudging the table in multiple directions, at least in this Plus 2 version. But there are 2 major problems with Silverball that really make it obvious that this game is a predecessor. The first is the tables themselves, and more specifically their layout and targets. Let's just take a look at them all briefly here. The first table is the generically titled Fantasy and contains a wide open playfield with very few targets, bumpers you usually overshoot, and holes that jarringly teleport your ball. Blood is another unimaginative table with a lack of interesting targets, but at least it has some additional ramps to take and some lightable lanes and bumpers that are fun to play with. Snooker Champ is an old-school styled table with a bunch of rollover switches and drop targets everywhere. Odyssey features a mythological theme and some attempts at interesting ramps and lanes that just fall flat in practice. Then you have Warbot, which is just a cheaply reskinned version of Epic Pinball's Excalibur table with less fancy effects and slightly lamer music. And finally, there's Duel, which is a variant on Epic Pinball's Magic Table, although with a default high score of 100,000 that makes it stupidly hard to even get on the board because the points that it doles out are so low. Even more finally, there's the extra table Nova, which uses the music from Epic Pinball's Space Journey table and themes from Solar Winds, but features outlanes that are entirely too easy to fall into, and an asteroid belt. Asteroid. So yeah, the lineup of tables disappoints in a major kind of way, and it's telling that the most decent ones are those more or less ripped directly from Epic Pinball. The second major problem is the game's physics in general, and as I've said in previous reviews, a pinball game with wonky physics is about as useful as a mint-flavored suppository. It's a nice thought, but what's the point? The ball just kind of does what it wants to at times, floating around the playfield like a helium-infused turd. I never really feel connected to what's going on, and in a simulation that's trying to mimic a game that's all about physicality, that's just not good. When I smack the ball with a flipper or perform a tap pass or a drop catch, I should be able to feel like I have control over the ball. But here it's just so obvious that I'm playing a weird PC pinball game and not any semblance of a real table, and it's incredibly off-putting. It also just feels inconsistent, like some tables have a different set of physical rules than the others. Who knows, maybe that's why fantasy is called fantasy and not reality, because the table exists in a universe where normal pinball physics don't apply. Now I know this game was a stepping stone on the way to greatness and maybe was never even intended to see the light of day, but when you isolate it and look at it on its own merits, Silverball just doesn't impress. Combine all this with playfield artwork that fails to inspire and occasional glitches involving collision detection, and it's easy to see why Silverball is all but forgotten, and Epic Pinball is still remembered fondly by many. That's not to say it's not worth your time at all, because if you're a hardcore fan of this series of pinball games, then it is. I looked for Silverball for years and was absolutely psyched to track down an original copy, but that's not because it was really good, it's because it's really rare, and I like owning weird pieces of gaming history. If you're as passionate about this stuff as I am, it's wonderful to have this. But if you're looking for a great DOS pinball game, there are several others that will provide tons of fun. If you're looking for a pinball title that no one remembers and will probably annoy you to no end, then Silverball is perfect. And if you're curious about Epic Pinball or other pinball games or just whatever, because I cover a lot of whatever here on this channel, then you are in the right place. Congratulations, you've accomplished something, I guess. You can click on some more videos here, or you can subscribe and go to my channel and check out those that are coming in the future. There are a lot on the way. You can also interact with and follow me on Twitter and Facebook, as well as support the show on Patreon for some extra goodies, and also help support the show continuing financially. And as always, thank you very much for watching.